You know, I don't say this about a lot of people or a lot of guests, but our next guest is a patriot. John Kiriakou is a whistleblower. He is a columnist with Reader-Supported News. He was a CIA analyst, a CIA case officer, a senior investigator for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, a counterterrorism, and may still be, for all I know, and is also still, as far as I know, a counterterrorism consultant for ABC News. He is also an author. He was the first CIA officer to be convicted of passing classified information to a reporter. Although that reporter did not publish the name of his source, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison on January 25th of 2013 and served time. He has been on the show before. He has a new book out. It is entitled Doing Time Like a Spy, How the CIA Taught Me to Survive and Thrive in Prison. First of all, John, thanks for coming back on the program.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine. Thanks very much for having me.
I think the last time I talked to you, you were still, the Jamaican term for it used to be under heavy manners. You were still, as I recall, restricted by who you could talk to, and I had to get permission from. Right. All that is gone. All that is behind you now, I guess. And now you're able to write about your experience with the criminal justice system, right?
Yes, indeed. I've got another just slightly less than 6 weeks of federal probation, and in which case I'll then be scot-free. But yeah, pretty much I'm free to do whatever I want.
Well, that's good to know. And in terms of just so that in case people aren't familiar with your case, you were one of those whistleblowers who had the book thrown at them by the national security system under President Obama, right?
Right. President Obama prosecuted 8 Americans under the Espionage Act. This was a World War I era law designed to target German saboteurs. And Obama's 8 prosecutions compare to 3 prosecutions from all previous presidents combined. So it was a pretty heavy hand.
Yeah, it was a pretty heavy hand, and I don't know who the source for that story was, but it seems to me that the story in question was one where I believe the reporter was also threatened with criminal prosecution, which is unheard of.
Yeah, that was really life under Eric Holder at the Justice Department. The Justice Department was threatening reporters all the time, and indeed the reporters that were involved in my case were actively threatened.
Yeah, and that is not the America I like to see, particularly when the stories in question are stories about things the American people need to know and understand that are being done in their name. So a flash forward a little bit. So you went to prison. You wrote this upcoming book to be published in May, Doing Time Like a Spy. So your interesting subtitle, I think it will catch some attention, How the CIA Taught Me to Survive and Thrive in Prison. So briefly, well, first of all, I just want to say, John, that I've read the book, and while I don't like to take pleasure from the misfortune of others, I actually enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I found it gripping and in some cases even amusing, although I'm sure none of it was amusing at the time.
No, none of it was amusing at the time. And to tell you the truth, I really had no intentions at all of writing a book. A couple of weeks before I went to prison, I was at a dinner party with a couple of people that your readers may recognize. It was Jesselyn Radak, who's a renowned whistleblower attorney, and Tom Drake, who was an NSA whistleblower, Daniel Ellsberg, who's sort of the granddaddy of all whistleblowers. He's the one who released the Pentagon Papers back in the early 1970s. And a woman who owned a political website called firedoglake.com. And she said, hey, when you finally get to prison and you start feeling comfortable, why don't you write us a letter and we'll publish it on the website so that your supporters can see that you're doing well and you can give them an update. And there were about 600 people who had expressed interest in reading something like that. They had signed up for a mailing list. So I waited quite a bit of time. I waited about 9 weeks before I actually sat down and wrote something. I did not realize when I wrote it, I called it a letter from Loretto, but I didn't realize when I wrote it that I was actually exposing a federal crime that had been committed against me by two of the prison guards. And so I sent it in. I also didn't know that this friend who owned the website was good friends with Arianna Huffington. And so when my friend published it, Arianna Huffington picked it up for the Huffington Post, and it went completely crazy after that. I ended up with something close to 2 million hits, and then I was flooded, literally flooded with letters and calls to the warden's office expressing concern, and even the likes of CNN and 60 Minutes drove to the prison and tried to get comments and interviews. It really took on a life of its own.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you're talking about people I know. I was one of the first writers for the Huffington Post. I knew Jane Hampshire at Fire Dog Lake and wrote there. So it's a small community, and I remember those days well. But having said that, I had never thought about the notion that CIA training would be useful in prisons. So how did that work?
To tell you the truth, that had never even occurred to me until the day that I got there and turned myself in. In my sentencing, my attorneys asked the judge to send me to a minimum security work camp, and the prosecution agreed, and the judge made the recommendation. So at a minimum security work camp, there are no bars on the windows, there's no barbed wire. A lot of the guys work in town. You're free to come and go as you please, and you're sort of on your honor to not abscond. When I got to the prison, I went and checked in. I said, "I'm John Kiriakou. I'm here to turn myself in." And the policeman there, or the corrections officer, put me through a metal detector and then began escorting me around to the back of the prison. And I said, no, there's a mistake. I'm supposed to be at the minimum security camp across the street, not in the actual prison. And he kind of laughs and he says, "Not according to my paperwork, you're not." And I told myself, take it easy. There's nothing you can do. If you flip out on this guy, they're going to put you in solitary. So I didn't say a word. Well, it was 5 days before I could finally get access to a telephone. And I called my attorney and I said, "Hey, they put me in the actual prison, not in the camp." And he said, "Wow, well, we can file a motion, but it'll be 2 years before we get a hearing. And you'll be home by then, so you're just going to have to tough it out. I'm sorry." And I went to my cell. I got this cell assignment, and I remember sitting there and saying, "All right, you're on your own. You're going to have to rely on what you've been trained to do in order to keep yourself safe and to make sure that you stay at the top of the heap." And that included things like making strategic alliances, let's say. I say in the book, the number one job of every spy is to recruit spies to steal secrets or anything else that you need. Or things like, if calm is not to your benefit, then chaos is your friend. Or admit nothing, deny everything, make counter accusations. So there were like 20 of these life lessons that I learned at the CIA that I used to, like I said, to keep myself safe. And it actually worked out quite well.
Yeah, you tell a lot of those stories of these. It's kind of like those business leadership books, except for convicts. But
Right.
but you tell a lot of the stories, and they're actually they're very engaging stories. With you met a lot of interesting people in there,
Sure.
some pretty disturbed people, I would say, frightening people, but also some sort of Damon Runyon-like characters. And I guess my biggest question for you would be, were there many times when you felt physically unsafe?
Not really. The only time that I wondered whether I was going to find myself in a predicament, the threat to my safety came from the guards, not from other prisoners. No, the other prisoners took to me. Yeah, I tell this story in the book where, as I was being processed in, the only thing that the guard said to me, other than, stand up, look in the camera, here's your change of clothes, whatever. The only thing he said to me was, if anybody comes into your cell uninvited, that's an act of aggression. And I thought, geez, oh man, I've been here for 40 minutes and I'm going to get my ass kicked.
Right.
So I was sitting in a chair in my cell. I had been in the prison about 2 hours, and two members of the Aryan Brotherhood walked into my cell. One had an enormous swastika across the entire front half of his neck. So I jumped up and I put my fists up. I said, "What do you want?" And the guy said, "Take it easy. Are you the new guy?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Are you a fag?" And I said, "No." He said, "Are you a rat?" And I said, "No, I didn't have anybody else in my case. I didn't rat anybody out." He said, "Are you a chomo?" Well, I had never heard the term chomo. I said, I don't know what that means. He said, "Child molester. Are you a child molester?" I said, "No, I'm not a child molester." And he said, "Well, you can sit with the Aryans in the cafeteria." And I thought, okay, well, I guess I'm with the Aryans now, of all things. And then after a while, I struck up a friendship with a senior captain in the Bonanno crime family. I'd finish my New York Times and give it to him, and he would finish his New York Post and give it to me, and we'd talk sports and what have you. And he said to me one day, "Hey, let me ask you a question. Why do you sit with those Nazi retards in the cafeteria?" And I said, "I don't know. My first day here, they told me to sit with them." And very dramatically, he put up his finger and he said, "From today, you're with the Italians." And so from that day, I sat with the Italians in the cafeteria and became quite close to several of them. And, once word got around that I was with the Italians, even though the Italians were the smallest group in prison, they commanded really the most respect. So once word got around that I was with the Italians, I never had a second of trouble.
I always anticipated that if I wound up in prison, that I would pick the wrong alliances in, and that
Easy.
that would be the end of me. And that if the Italians told me now you have to sit with the Italians, that I'd be so afraid of offending the Aryans, which sounds ridiculous when you say it, that they'd shank me or something. I mean, I don't know, but it sounds like maybe your CIA training helped you navigate the politics of these clannish relationships a lot better.
It really did. And, another thing that the CIA taught me that was sort of amusing at the time that I was learning it, but became very, very important, is to manipulate people into doing your dirty work for you so that your hands remain clean. And that's what I did. I'm almost embarrassed to say this to you, but I was very manipulative in prison. I talk in the book about sitting next to a serial killer in the TV room, a serial killer of young women. And he had a problem with a guy who was doing 20 years for a contract killing. These were bad people I was in prison with. This was no party. There's no such thing as Club Fed, for example. I hate when people say that because there is no such thing.
Right.
So the contract killer didn't like me at all because I told him I didn't want him to move into my room. I said I had a problem with his crime. I had a problem with the fact that he had a reputation as a rat, and I didn't want to live with him. And so he didn't see me sitting in the TV room, and I heard him say that I was a rat. I had been called down to the lieutenant's office earlier in the day because I had a media interview request, and they wanted to know if I wanted to do the interview or not. Well, he told people I was down there ratting other people out. So he didn't see me sitting there, and he said to another prisoner, "Did you hear Kiriakou got called to the lieutenant's office? That guy's a rat." And the serial killer turned to me and said, "Did you hear that? That guy just called you a rat." And I said to the serial killer, "That's funny, because 2 hours ago, I heard him call you a child molester." And the serial killer got up without saying a word, got up, walked over to the hitman, and beat him into a bloody, unconscious pulp. and they ended up both being transferred to other prisons. So I did well.
I guess you did. It's a pretty horrible story. It's a pretty horrible way to try to survive, to have to survive. But now that you're out, we only have about a minute left, John. But now that you're out, how do you look back at that experience?
You know, prison is a horrible, horrible place. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. We have very serious problems, both at the state and at the federal level. Problems that as Americans we should be ashamed of. But at the same time, as horrible an experience as it was, it made me a very patient person, and it made me realize that despite the cost, I did the right thing, and I would do it again. In the end, it was all worth it.
Well, good. I'm glad you've come to that point in your life. You deserve that. Our guest is John Kiriakou. The book is Doing Time Like a Spy, How the CIA Taught Me to Survive and Thrive in Prison. John, good to talk to you again, and thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks so much. It was a pleasure.